So how does reactivity factor into anxiety responses?
Okay, so
That's one way.
anxiety is the feeling,
Mm.
reactivity is the expression. So anxiety is the feeling that they're feeling, whether it's fear, whether it's anxiety, whether it's nervousness. So that the anxiety is the feeling that is underneath, and the reactivity is the expression. It's the explosion. It's the barking, growling, lunging. So reactivity is the actual expression of what's going on.
Hello, humans and puggies. Welcome to the Pug Life Show, brought to you by Pug Parties, because your pug deserves to be the best dressed at the party. And you can check out the Pugs and Stripes collection at pugparties.com. I'm your host, Donna, and with me are my puggy co-hosts, Rosie and Kenji, with their rescue foster brother, Buster. Now, in this episode, we're unpacking something that affects more pugs than we often realise: canine anxiety and reactivity. From sudden reactivity on a walk to the silent worry that plays out behind those big brown eyes, anxiety in our pugs isn't always loud, but it is always worth understanding. We're so lucky to have our friend Sarah Rutten, canine behaviourist and author of the best-selling book, The Canine Perspective, coming back on the show to help us break down exactly what anxiety and reactivity mean, how they show up in our pugs, and most importantly, how to spot the early signs. It's like, what's behind that sudden freeze? Or why your pug growls at a stranger when they've seen them a dozen times before? As always, Sarah brings both science and compassion to the conversation, helping us understand what's really going on in our pugs' brains and bodies and what we can do to help them feel safe again. Plus, there might be a Floyd, the 5-month-old pug bark or two in the mix as well. Now, if you've ever worried that your pug is not coping or they're behaving strangely, then this episode is for you. But before we zoom in, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. You'll find the link in the show notes so you can be the first to know when the next episode lands, as well as get access to lots more pugtastic goodies. Hello, Sarah. Welcome back to the Pug Life Show. Thank you so much for coming back.
Hi, Donna. It's so great to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, no, it's wonderful. I had such a great time when we recorded episode 6. For those of you that haven't listened to it, you do need to go back and listen to it, although you don't technically need to listen to it for today's episode to make sense. But thankfully, you agreed to come back and talk about what I was saying offline before was sometimes can be a hotly contested issue at playgroup, anxiety, and possibly and also behaviour escalation, which can then sometimes lead to aggression.
Mhm.
That people don't always, what's the word I'm looking for? Don't read the signs correctly and then end up getting themselves into a bit of trouble, or the pug gets themselves into a bit of trouble. So thank you so much for coming back. And so before we start, on the assumption that people haven't heard episode 6,
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about yourself and about your fur family.
Okay, sure. So my name is Sarah Rutten. I am the owner and head trainer and canine behaviour specialist of the Canine Perspective. I've also written a book by the same name, The Canine Perspective, using force-free methods to unleash your dog's potential, which has become an Amazon bestseller, which I'm so excited
Yes.
about.
And it was a fabulous read.
Oh, thank you. So I've been a canine behaviour specialist for 21 years, which I tell everybody makes me older than I care to admit. But I've loved every single second of it. And I am a very, very proud tragic pug mum of 2. I keep going to say 3. It was 3,
Yeah.
but we lost 2 very close together, one in October of last year and one in January of this year. So now we went from 3 to 1 very quickly, and now we are back at 2 because we have Doug, our old man pug, who's nearly 11. He'll be 11 in September. And then we have little Floyd, who is a crazy puppy who might make an appearance with
A vocal appearance.
vocal appearance. He's 5 months. He's just a little over 5 months old at the moment. So he makes us laugh, and at the moment, he's outside playing with the bloodhound, who is my friend's dog. So he's kind of busy at the moment, having a lovely time. So that's a little bit about me and my fur family. My husband and I are both pug tragics. So yes,
Thank God.
we love your podcast.
We need more trainers, pug tragics. That's all I can say.
Well, I get people that say to me, you're a trainer, you're a canine behaviour specialist. Why do you have pugs? And I'm like, why wouldn't you? Like, they're so easy. They're so food motivated. They're so easy to train. Why wouldn't
Oh, yes.
wouldn't you?
Yep.
After spending all day helping people with their dogs and their dogs' problems, I get to come and sit on the couch with my dog watching Netflix. It's great.
Yes.
So, yeah.
They're the
So
perfect size for your lap to keep it warm on a cold day.
that's right. Exactly.
It
Exactly.
just
So,
to me, it's
so
just to me, it's perfect. And when you've got 3 or 2, I mean, like at the moment we've got 3, so I have one on the lap and one other side. So that's pretty much got me all covered
yeah. Yeah.
when they're when
We
they're
don't
sleeping. But I can imagine Floyd doesn't really stay still for very long.
No, he doesn't. He hasn't quite grasped the concept of snuggling yet. He's still in puppy mode,
Downtime.
but that's all right. We will educate him on what it means to be a snuggler, what it means to be a puggy snuggler. Anyway, that's a bit about
He does look cuddly though. He's got the right body shape for cuddle when he's ready.
yes, he does. I'm not quite sure how to take. He's a bit chunky, but so he
Oh no,
does.
he's
He
cuddly.
he is cuddly. He's very soft and furry and squishy. He's beautiful, but he is a puppy. He loves to play bitey face. And yes, he's divine. He is divine. So we love him. We love him dearly. Just as well he's cute. Let's put it that way. Let's put it that way.
Even when he's misbehaving as being an adolescent.
Oh,
Well, he definitely does not suffer from anxiety. Let's just put that out there right now.
no, he doesn't. Although he's going through his fear, potentially going through his fear imprint period, because that happens during puppyhood and adolescence. So I'm keeping a very close eye on things because he does occasionally startle at certain things. We're still socializing him to various different things. So yeah, I'm still keeping a little bit of an eye on that because sometimes, during fear imprint periods, you can have things that happen that you don't think is particularly big or special or scary, and in actual fact,
Yeah.
because of where the dog's nervous system is at with regards to their development, it ends up imprinting on them. So, it is still a time when I keep a little eye on things and make sure. I mean, he does have this tendency to I was going to say bait the other dogs. He actually doesn't bait the other dogs, but he has this personality where he kind of goes, "You can't get me," and then he runs between my legs and then goes, "See, I'm safe." And then he does it again, and I'm like, "You're gonna get yourself in trouble, buddy."
You
So
are the same.
just
You're gonna
just
cop
be
a
careful.
flogging.
Yeah. You're gonna get a paddling at some point from those other dogs. So he does it in the most cheeky, beautiful, amazing way, but he's got some sass. Let's put it that way. He's got some real sass, which I love. But I keep an eye on it. I'm always on the lookout for anxiety stuff. So, it's good that we're talking about this topic today.
Absolutely. And probably because we will circle back to fear imprinting and all those sort of things, but probably
Mm.
the most important thing is to talk about what causes anxiety. We're just going to say pug, even though in reality it's all dogs.
Mhm.
Um, and and probably the second part of that is are there different types of anxiety?
Mhm. Okay. So
Mm,
what causes anxiety is a super interesting question because there's so much that can cause anxiety.
mm,
So from genetics, there can be some dogs who are genetically disposed to being a little more anxious or a little more timid. Pugs have a tendency to be a little bit more robust than the average dog, but even within the breed, have still seen some timid pugs. I have still seen some quite anxious pugs. We can see, throughout their development, if there's something traumatic that happens to them, that can cause anxiety, whether it is neglect, abuse, needs not being met. So, there are things that can, if they get attacked by another dog, that can actually cause anxiety.
mhm,
Pugs can have a tendency towards anxiety about being alone and separation anxiety. They can have a tendency towards that because they're very social dogs. They love company. They were bred for companionship, so their need for company is quite high. I do know of somebody who I can't remember if I talked about this in the last time that I was on, but I had somebody ring me once and he said, "Oh, look, my girlfriend's pug is barking a lot, and she's a flight attendant. She leaves. She she leaves the dog alone for long periods of time. And I said, and the barking collar's not working. And I went, well, the reason why the barking collar's not working is firstly, get that thing off the dog. And secondly, the
Mm.
dog's need for companionship. How long is this person leaving the dog, for long periods of time? Oh, sometimes she has a 12-hour shift. That's too long for any
Yeah.
dog to be left alone, but particularly a pug. So, those breeds bred for companionship, pug being one of them, they need company. And if they're left alone for too long, they struggle with anxiety. But also we start to see anxiety develop potentially as they age. So the aging process can sometimes cause changes to the way, their interpretation of the world. They lose their hearing, some of them lose their eyesight. That can cause anxiety. There is something which is called canine cognitive dysfunction. It's called
Yes.
Alzheimer's,
Oh,
and it's like
yes.
Alzheimer's. That can have an anxiety component. Dogs who are in constant pain, as they get older, they can develop arthritis, they can develop spinal issues. Doug actually has intervertebral disc disease, so IVDD.
Mm.
That pain can bring with it anxiety. And, sometimes it can just manifest out of what seems like thin air.
Feels like
Sometimes
thin air.
it feels like thin air. Sometimes we can find that the dog, it's one instance learning. I had a dog, wasn't a pug, but a client of mine whose dog developed storm phobia after being caught out in a storm. Big life
Mm.
events can actually
Oh,
trigger
God.
anxiety. So
Mm.
that being abandoned, being dumped at a shelter, but there's all sorts of ways that anxiety can develop. Diet. There's a very strong link between gut health and the brain. So there's so many ways
Oh,
that
yeah.
anxiety can develop. It can be, yeah, a bit of a minefield, and there's a lot of it out there. There's a lot of pugs. There's a lot of dogs, but there's a lot of pugs at times struggling with
Mm.
anxiety. There's a lot of people struggling with anxiety. So it's no surprise that our dogs are struggling with it too.
Absolutely, and it's sort of, I suppose it's one of those things where I think if you're not looking for it,
Mm.
or if you don't, I suppose if you don't even think to understand what's going on with your pug, then you do misread it. You misread it as being something else. Or as I was saying before, like I've had people say to me, oh, my pug suffers from separation anxiety, but none of the separation anxiety tricks are working. And I'm like, well, have you seen somebody about it being something else? Because it might not actually be separation anxiety. It could actually be a different trigger.
I think sometimes what happens is we see what we consider to be bad behavior, like the barking or the destruction of property
Mm.
or the howling or we see what we consider to be bad behavior, and it's actually our pugs. It's a bit of a cry for help. So,
Communicating.
yeah, barking particularly, when we see pugs in general, they were never bred to really be barkers. Jack Russells, yes. Pugs,
Oh.
not so much. You get some that Doug likes to act as security at times. He
Yes.
lets me know when someone, a sparrow's farted up the street. He likes to let me know. But, in general, most pugs are not chronic barkers. And so when you get a pug who's a chronic barker, I'll guarantee you there's something else going on. Guarantee it's
Mm.
merely a symptom. So often we get notified that there's some anxiety stuff going on when there's what we consider bad behavior or problematic behavior. And usually it is a symptom, usually.
Mm.
Of s-
No, and I have to like Kenji, sorry, I shouldn't laugh. He just fell off the bed.
I shouldn't laugh either.
I know, it's terrible. I shouldn't. And he's because they've been sleeping for a little while, he looks a little bit confused as to how he managed to roll off the bed. It's terrible.
Oh, bless them.
I was gonna say he's gonna be anxious now because I'm laughing at him. It's poor thing. I just looked over because like earlier today we were out for a walk and it's quite interesting. I mean, Buster's blind and deaf, so for him, I have to admit, I'm super aware of he will not toilet on a walk.
Mm,
And initially, I sort of went, oh, maybe it's because his previous family never took him for a walk. We do know that. And then it sort of dawned on me. Actually, I think it was after I read your book, and I thought, God, I'm a moron. And I went, how vulnerable must you feel as a dog when
mm,
you're walking down a street that you've only been walking down for a couple of months? You can barely see, barely hear. And when is one of your most vulnerable points in your walk? It's when you're stopping to go to the toilet.
mm.
Um, And so, I mean, I still reward him when he does on the off chance decide that he wants to go to the toilet. But then I sit there thinking to myself, how much must he trust me, Rosie and Kenji,
Mm,
for him to feel comfortable enough to then actually go to the toilet, even if it's only a quick piddle? Like I sort of, after reading a book, I just sort of went, that's obviously why Buster um, doesn't really want to go to the toilet on a walk, and it had never dawned on me until after I'd read your book. And so sort of I've now left him be. I don't try to encourage him as much to go to the toilet because I think, you know what, you do you, mate.
mm,
But it's funny because I also watch Kenji. Tried to we've tried to drop down his fluoxetine because he was really bad when he come into Pug Rescue. And so he was an absolute definite case for medication initially, with a long-term hope that we'd sort of get him to a point where he felt so safe and comfortable that he wouldn't need it anymore. Um, so we dropped him down and it was horrendous.
mm,
So we've ended up having to put him back up, and we now know that for Kenji, that is just he needs to be on a full dose to live a really good pug life. But it's quite interesting. Even on a walk, he will still bark. There'll be a dog 200 meters down the road and he will let me know. His tail is still wagging. Sometimes I think it's just him saying, "Mum, look, there's another pug. There's another dog." Really is a pug.
mm,
Um, but I do sit there after having read your book about the fact that barking is actually a good thing, not a bad thing.
mm,
I sit there and I go, "Oh, I wonder if this is an anxiety response or if it's just him saying, 'Mum, look, that's another dog down the road,' sort of thing," because
mm,
his tail's wagging, but he is quite alert.
mm,
Um, and so that's why I sit there going, I think this is sometimes I think we misread what our dogs are doing.
mm,
So we then try and fix something that's actually not broken.
mm. Yeah, look, sometimes. I mean, it is, and I guess this is where I come in as, having done this for so long, and and this being an unregulated industry that I work in as well. I mean, I've got 4 different qualifications and done about 5 years worth of study. We've got a little puggo who's decided he's gonna have a little tanty off to the
Come
side.
in.
But, sometimes we interpret, like, I actually had somebody, a journalist who wanted some comment. "You can go down the stairs, mate. Off you go." A journalist who wanted some comment on, do dogs hold grudges? And I think that we humans do attribute, dogs do have feelings, dogs do have emotions. Dogs often have mixed emotions like we do as well. They can have
Mm,
conflicting feelings. So it may be that, was it Kenji that you said, who,
yes.
like
It was
Kenji.
bark, but his tail was wagging at the same time. It was very
So it could be, "Oh, there's a friend. Oh, I'm not really sure." And maybe the tail wag is not necessarily friendly, but it just shows that he's alert. So, there can be behavior can be complex, but dogs don't hold grudges.
mm,
Dogs, the complexity of emotion that we feel, they do feel things like grief and happiness and sadness and love and anger, but they don't feel guilt. They don't hold grudges. They don't. So the complexity of their emotions isn't quite as complex as what
mm,
humans are. And I think sometimes we interpret certain behaviors to think it's something. Often we think they're either trying to protect us or dominate us, or get one up on us, or do all sorts of things that I think humans are probably more likely to be doing than what
mhm,
dogs are. And quite often, and we see this too in reactivity. And by reactivity, I'm talking about the lunging, the barking, the noise that comes when dogs are
mhm,
often quite anxious. But what it gets interpreted as is aggression. And sometimes we see frustration looking like that too, or excitement
mhm,
can look like that as well. So it's not surprising that us humans kind of we get it wrong a lot of the time. And we get it wrong with our own species a lot of the time. Let's be honest. I mean, I often
yes.
say to I often say to people, we have enough trouble communicating with our own species, and we speak the same language. Anyone who lives with the opposite sex knows that we have enough trouble
Oh,
communicating
yes.
with our own species. So we get it wrong as humans quite a lot of the time. We misinterpret stuff a lot of the time. We don't know what we're looking for a lot of the time. And that is where I come in and I help the human side of the equation, is to go, "Okay, this is what your dog is saying. This is what your dog is telling you. This is what your dog's body language is telling me, and I'm helping you to interpret it. And dogs do give mixed signals at times. Dogs do go, yes, I'm feeling excited and stressed by that, and a bit nervous about that, and I'm not sure about that, but I'm really excited about that. And it can be this mixed bag, just like it can be for us. So I think, yes, we get it wrong. We misinterpret things. We mislabel things. There's new stuff coming out about dogs with ADHD and dogs with ADD and dogs with autism. And I'm
Wow.
like, really? Do we have to go there? Do we really have to go there and pop a label on everything? Really? Yeah.
I'm
So, I'm not sure I subscribe to any of that. I need to do more research myself on that. But it's yeah,
At
I
least we're
think
doing the research,
yeah.
because 20 years ago, there was nothing.
Well, 20 years ago, we didn't even know that it was there for humans, and even still, like, don't get me started on that. But I'm like, do we all need to be in a box, really? So yeah, look, and what we were talking about before we started the recording with regards to separation anxiety and what does separation anxiety look like, and there's a
Mm,
difference between separation anxiety and anxiety about being alone. And anxiety about certain triggers, and there's things called trigger stacking. There's so much when it
mm,
comes to anxiety. There's so much when it comes to anxiety that sometimes people do need to call in a professional. Sometimes people
mm,
do need help. And unfortunately, the internet can be really great, YouTube can be really great. It can also be really crap. Like there's some really great stuff on the internet and on
yes.
YouTube. There's some very outdated stuff. There's some very conflicting stuff. It can be a real minefield for the human part of the equation. And I really feel for the average parent, because not that pug
Mm.
parents are average, I must say. We're all
No, we're
but
exceptional.
we're exceptional. But I do really feel for the general public in that there's so much conflicting information. And like I said, some of it's good, some of it's crap, some of it's so outdated it's not funny. Some of it still
Mm,
talks about things like dominance, which has been disproven. It was debunked like back in the 60s. And
yeah.
yet people are still referring to it as being the reason why dogs do stuff. And it can be an absolute minefield. It can be really tough, which is why I wrote the book, because I wanted to give people some guidance. I also wanted to make people laugh, so that was a bonus.
Oh,
But
definitely that.
yeah, so I wanted to make people laugh and learn some stuff about their dog at the same time. So yeah, it can be challenging for sure.
Oh,
Reading it,
absolutely.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
I think the worst part about it is the more you learn, the more you go, "Oh my god," and then you start thinking about all your previous pugs, and then you just go, "Oh my god, if only," the usual, "If only I knew my 20/20 vision in hindsight."
yeah.
But at the end of the day, I mean, whenever somebody talks to me at playgroup or at the coffee shop or whatever else, I just say to them, like, sometimes the best thing that you can learn is to watch your pug and
Mhm.
go, "Does that seem normal?" And then ask the right person. Don't
And like
don't
we're talking about normal and pugs in the same,
Yes.
is
Well,
that
our
really
last 2
normal?
I mean, I have to admit, our last 2
I don't know.
episodes, we've literally went through, this is what to expect from a pug to care for them, because a lot of the stuff that we see coming through at Pug Rescue,
Mm,
some of the health issues that the pugs that come through, if they'd gotten the right care from the beginning, it would
yeah,
never have gotten that bad. And then,
yeah.
we're now spending thousands of dollars on surgery because of a preventable thing that happened a couple of years ago. And I
Mm,
think sometimes it's kind of the same thing. If we educate ourselves on what's normal for a pug,
mm.
like being sneezed in the face and all that sort of stuff, like then sort of,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
you can kind of like get through all the chaff and go,
Mm,
okay, this is actually something that I need to go and speak to a professional about, whether that's
mm,
a vet or a trainer or whoever.
mm,
Um, and I have to admit, it's one of the reasons why I started the podcast. I just sort of went, Chinese whispers at playgroup sometimes can actually be rather detrimental, and so we
mm,
need to be getting the advice from the right people who have the right knowledge, which is why I love having you on the show. So, and especially anxiety obviously is quite close to my heart because
mm,
we've had Kenji and we had Roxy, who was one of our previous fosters. She luckily is now a beach baby, so
mm,
her new family, thankfully have gotten, what's the word I'm looking, the benefit of all the work that we've sort of done. So she now lives her best life, which is just absolutely amazing. But she was a pug that even before COVID had been locked up in a house. And as you were saying before, like there's kind of a new anxiety that seems to be coming out, and it's kind of COVID anxiety, for want of a better term, even though in reality it's just a pug that hasn't been socialized. Is there such a thing as non-socialization anxiety?
I don't know. Uh, well, we just call it being under socialized.
Yeah.
So we just call it, anxiety from being under socialized. But there is now a term coming out which is called COVID dogs, being a COVID dog,
Oh,
and
wow.
that's a dog. I told you labels. Do we have to?
Yes, it does.
But
It does make
but
it easier for me to remember, though.
well, it does. So a COVID dog is a dog who was obtained during COVID, and because of various restrictions or lockdowns, didn't get to have that socialization that they needed during their crucial socialization period, and now has anxiety to a whole load of triggers. And it's not just other dogs. It can be men, it can be kids, it can be bikes, it can be cars,
Oh,
trucks, buses, it was scooters, skateboard, like you name it. The human world basically is a entire the entire human world is a trigger for them. And so these poor dogs are so anxious just about being in the world because they didn't get to socialize during that really crucial socialization period. And some of them are struggling with not only that, but also separation anxiety because their
yes.
parents
Hooman.
were at
Got
home all the time
Yeah.
and then they went back to work. So it's these dogs are really, really struggling. And you talked about medication. There's a lot of trainers out there who really poo-poo medication, there's a lot of trainers out there who are like, "You can do this without medication. You don't need to put your dog on medication. It's lazy putting your dog on medication. It's a cop-out putting your dog on medication." I think the reality of it is that there's some dogs out there that actually their anxiety is that bad, they need to be on medication. And when we're looking at training new behaviors, dogs, and I do talk about this in the book, but dogs need to be
Mm.
what's called sub-threshold in order to
Mm.
learn. Their frontal lobe, the part of the brain at the front, the frontal lobe, right here, I'm pointing to it for those that can't
Yep.
see, that has
Touch
to
wood.
that has to be online. And when you go into fight or flight, or when you go over your arousal threshold and you're functioning from hindbrain, so your amygdala kicks in, that frontal lobe actually shuts down. And if a dog is too stressed and is constantly in fight or flight, their brain, the part of the brain involved in learning, is simply not like there's very little blood flow there. And so they simply can't learn. It's not that they don't want to, it's not that they're aggressive, it's that they're stressed out of their brain and they're not coping. And so what medication can do is simply help that part of the brain to actually it helps the amygdala to kind of switch off a little bit and quieten
Mm.
down a little bit so that that frontal lobe can switch on so that they can learn. So, medication, and it's not a matter of shoving a dog on medication and then that's it. It's a matter of, putting them on medication so they can be calm enough to learn, doing the work, and then seeing if we can actually wean them off the medication and hope that the body has readjusted itself to the point where they can cope with stuff again. And for some dogs, we can be incredibly successful with that. And for other dogs, their nervous system is just way too dysregulated and they need that medication. And look, to be honest, there's lots of humans like that too. So I know that there's
Yeah.
lots of people out there who get a lot of judgment from having their dogs on meds or think that it's, that it's a cop out or that it's it's a
Yeah.
weakness. Or there are some dogs who, in order to do the desensitization work that's necessary with anxiety, there's some dogs that actually need it. They need to be on those
Yeah.
meds. And and when we're talking about desensitization work and helping those dogs with anxiety, using methods like correction training or that sort of thing, it just only adds to anxiety. And the attempt is to dampen or get rid of the response, but it doesn't actually change the feeling that's going on underneath that's causing the reactivity in the first place. So, I do a lot of work with dogs with anxiety. I do a lot of work with dogs with reactivity, mostly not pugs because we don't. Pugs generally are pretty good with
Yep.
this, but I do a lot of work with dogs with anxiety and reactivity and separation anxiety, and just generalized anxiety. There's COVID dogs. Like there's so many. So that's the
Oh,
bulk
yeah.
of my work, to be honest, is working with
Mm.
anxiety.
And look, as I was saying before, Kenji, I will put my hand up and say pre-Kenji, I just went, not really sure that pugs need meds for crying out loud. Like, and to be honest, I'll put my hand up and also say I was diagnosed with PTSD 4 years ago and I've had it for 20 years. So yeah, I'm in denial. I was in denial for quite a long time. So I am, I'm in that group. Um, but when we got Kenji and he come to us as a foster originally, he was on a full dose. He was still terrified of storms,
Mm,
but we'd sort of got him to the point where he felt so safe at home and in the, where we go for walks and play groups and things, that we just sort of went, oh, maybe it's time that we take him, we wean him off a little bit. We just drop the dose down, see how it goes. Oh my God.
mm,
Like we just and at the we gave him a good shot and we didn't do anything different.
mm,
So it wasn't like we were taking him to a new place where there were trains or big loud noises or any of that sort of stuff. It was literally still going to play groups, still going to do it, going to the local coffee shop, all the stuff that we've always done. And the crying in the car,
mm,
I just couldn't get it. And I get the cars do freak out dogs normally because of the vibration, but it was so big that I turned around to Andrew after a couple of weeks and said, I can't do this to him anymore. And we rang the vet and said, right, we need to put him straight back up. We're never going to do this again. We're
mm,
never going to do this to him. And it was just, and within 2 weeks, he was back to being happy. And
mm,
after that, I said to Andrew, I am convinced
mm,
in for Kenji, in that instance, I am convinced with him alone that he will always be on a full dose so
mm,
he can live his best life. There's sort of even other friends have just when he was off it said, Jesus, what's going on with Kenji? Because he would cry. We would be at Bark Park, which is an indoor dog park here.
mm,
And it's open plan, but obviously there's half walls so the dogs can't get out.
mm,
I would be on the other side of the half wall getting a cup of coffee, and he would be crying. And
mm,
people would stop and turn around and look at me, and I'd be like, "It's okay, it's Kenji. He just can't see me."
mm,
And so as long as he could see me, it was okay. And then the owner, Chanel, she said to me, "My God," and I went, "It's all right. I'm putting him." She knew he was on Prozac, and so I said, "I'm putting him back up to his full dose." And she said, "Yeah, he really is not
mm.
happy." I think she was trying to politely say to me, "Stop torturing him, Donna." Like, stop, which was really nice of her to say, but it was just
Yeah.
no, and I think it's why I'm now so interested about I sort of want to learn more about anxiety and the triggers and reactivity because, as I said, he's the first pug where I've really experienced quite the nth degree. We had a little bit with Charles, who had OCD,
Mm.
but we kind of expected that because it's like, "Well, you got OCD." Well, like
Mm, mm,
humans go through that with dementia. So,
mm,
but
mm,
yes, we're not sure what it is in Kenji's life prior to us that caused to be like this. So I think it's somewhere around the genetics slash lack of socialization
mm.
and possibly not even having had his primary or secondary needs met, which is what I wanted to quickly duck into because people may not understand that it's not meeting your pug's every need, which means giving them a treat every time they ask for it.
No.
This is not getting their needs met,
Mm.
causing anxiety is actually quite different. So can you quickly talk about that?
Yeah. So all dogs, let's talk about all dogs for the moment. All dogs have got primary needs of food, water, and shelter. All humans have that need as well, right? We sometimes there's a thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and
Mhm.
the base level, that's a pyramid. The base level of that is to be safe, to have some shelter,
Roof
have
over
some
your head
food.
and
Yeah, have some shelter, have some food, have some water, right? That's and to be safe. That is primary need number 1, just for survival. So dogs have also got secondary needs as well. So they've got the need for mental stimulation, so to have something to keep their brain busy, physical exercise to move their body, social contact to have contact with others, and pugs particularly have quite a high need for social contact, and then also to rest, to have some adequate rest to keep them mentally and physically and emotionally healthy. So they have the need to be free of disease and free of pain as well. So they have a number of needs. And quite often when one or more of those needs are not being met, we will see problem behaviors, whether that is anxiety based in the case of not getting enough social contact, whether it's things like, we can see some dogs that are overweight if they're not getting enough exercise or having a poor diet. We can see behavioral issues as a result of poor diet. We can see barking issues. We can see all sorts of problematic behaviors when those needs aren't being met. Boredom is a big one. With some dogs, if dogs are bored, they will find their own job to do. Thankfully, most pugs' job is to curl up on the couch and watch Netflix. So, we're mostly good.
Gaze out the window.
Sit on the couch and fart. That's
Yeah.
their job. But so sneeze in your face, as we've already established.
Yes.
That's their job. So their job. But if we were talking about a border collie or a blue heeler or even a guarding breed, a Rottie or a German Shepherd, they were bred for very different functions. And so our herding dogs particularly need a lot of mental stimulation and a lot of exercise. So we often see problem behaviors with them. Our terriers, the same, Jack Russell Terriers, Staffies. We can see a lot of anxiety in Staffies if they don't actually have a job to do. So when we don't have dogs or when they don't get their needs met, we can find that we can see problematic behaviors. And like I said, with pugs, that need for social contact, that's the one. If that's not being met, that's when I will see problem behaviors in dogs. That's when I'll get calls, oh, my dog is barking, or my pug is barking, or my pug is destroying the furniture. That doesn't usually happen unless there's some need not being met or there's something going on. And often when those needs aren't being met, we see anxiety. So it can, bored dogs aren't happy dogs. Understimulated dogs aren't happy dogs. Overstimulated dogs aren't happy dogs. Getting that right amount of stimulation and those needs met for the individual breed and the individual dog is really important, because even amongst the breed of pug, there will be some who need more than others in more exercise. A younger pug is going to need more exercise than an older pug. Different types of exercise for pugs is important as well. So, there's a lot that goes into being the guardian to a dog, but also being the guardian to a pug.
Yes.
That then just involves, sticking some food down for them and leaving them. But leaving them to it. As us pug tragics all know, we need to provide them more. But it's not about every time they look at you and bark that you and with those eyes that say, I need to have food.
Wasting away to nothing.
You fed me 10 minutes ago, but I need to have another meal. It's not that. It's about going, okay, actually, what do you need to keep you healthy and happy? That's more. Yeah, I know.
Like Floyd said.
Yes. Like, yes, I heard dinner. Not yet, mate. Not yet. So that's a little bit more of a clarification.
So leading on from that, we have sort of been talking about it, but I actually want to talk about it with probably a little bit more clarity. So reactivity, because some people kind of confuse anxiety and reactivity. So how does reactivity factor into anxiety responses?
Okay, so anxiety is the feeling, reactivity is the expression. So anxiety is the feeling that they're feeling, whether it's fear, whether it's anxiety, whether it's nervousness. So that the anxiety is the feeling that is underneath, and the reactivity is the expression. It's the explosion. It's the barking, growling, lunging. So reactivity is the actual expression of what's going on. So if I can use a human analogy, I've had a really stressful day and I'm feeling really stressed. And hubby comes home and says, what's for dinner? And I turn and go at him. That doesn't
Four-letter word, travel. You can travel right about now.
That doesn't actually happen in my house because he does the cooking. But it might be the other way around. I say, hey, baby, what's for dinner? And he goes, nah, because he's had a stressful day. So the anxiety is the feeling that goes on underneath. The reactivity is what comes out. It's the expression of how the dog is feeling underneath. And so when I'm doing work with reactivity and a lot of trainers will work on the reactivity. They'll work on trying to suppress the expression of the behavior, whether it's through using prong collars, shock collars, choke chains, corrections. They'll try and correct that behavior to try and stop the behavior. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't address the emotion going on underneath. And the emotion that's going on underneath is why we're getting that expression of behavior. So I work a bit differently in that I actually work, and a lot of force-free trainers work this way as well, is we work on trying to change the emotion, the way that the dog feels about the trigger, about the other dog, about the man, about the kids, about the bike, or whatever it is that's causing them to have anxiety, and create a more positive association. Because if you change the feeling, you change the reactivity, you change the expression. If a dog is no longer feeling anxious about something, then they're not going to act in a way that's the reason for their reactivity is to try and create space. Usually reactivity starts to increase as the trigger gets closer. If it's related to another dog, as the other dog gets closer, the reactivity gets gets louder and bigger and more expressive in an attempt to make that other dog go away. And so the attempt is to try and attempting to create space. So if the dog doesn't feel like the space needs to be created, we see a totally different behavior. And so by working on the emotion that's going on underneath, whether that's anxiety, frustration, excitement, or whatever it might be, fear, whatever it might be, if we're Floyd is having a little bark. If we it sounds like a pug bark, right?
Yes.
But if we're working on changing the feeling underneath by pairing really good stuff together with the trigger, we start to see a different expression of behavior.
And so the Pug Pawrent's job is to recognise the trigger before the pug does, so they can then take action, appropriate action, to
and look,
reduce.
This is the tricky part, and this is where a professional. I have no idea what he's barking at. What are you barking at, buddy?
He's agreeing with you. Yes, Mum. Whatever you say, Mum.
He's agreeing with me. I know. When I think we can shut the door now. I'm not really sure what you're barking at. Let's just stay inside. This is where getting help from a professional is really important, because this is where we start to get to technicalities. Humans have this tendency to want things to change overnight. They have this tendency to want to rush things. They have this tendency to unfortunately put dogs over threshold, and then not kind of, what do I do when my dog reacts? The idea is that you're working sub-threshold. The idea is that you're working at a distance and in a way that your dog doesn't get to that point of reacting. And that's often where a professional who, specializes in force-free methods, but also specializes in reactivity and anxiety, will actually help to show you how to do this, because there's a specific technique and a specific way of doing desensitization and counter conditioning protocols. They're two very big words that basically just mean change the way the dog feels. And so there's a lot of guidance that needs to happen, because this is where professionals, particularly force-free professionals, know what to look for, know what signs of stress to look for, know when the dog is escalating before we start to see that explosion of behavior. There's a lot of body language cues that the dog will give before they even get to the point of uttering a sound. And so those professionals know what to look for and can actually educate the Pawrents about, okay, do you see how he's doing this? Do you see how she's doing this? This means that she's actually not happy. This means that she's starting to stress. This means that her arousal levels are building. This means that she's starting to get anxious. Because what we tend to do is we tend to wait until we see the explosion and then go, oh, okay, she was really stressed. But there was so much leading up to that. And pug, but not just pug Pawrents, but Pawrents in general, when we don't know what we don't know. So if we don't know what those signs are, how are we going to be able to identify them if somebody in the know doesn't teach us? So learning what those signs are and learning how to actually do a successful desensitization and counter conditioning protocol is really important for these dogs with anxiety.
And I also think, I know that perspective is, what do they say? There's 7 signs. There's 7 signs to every event that happens. I'm walking with my pug by my side, and obviously I have 3, so I've got 3 that I've got to keep watching at all times. But having someone who's actually standing a couple of paces away going, Donna, you can't see it, but this is what's happening on their face right now. And so then because you can't see all of their face. You see the top of their head and their back, and so you're only seeing those triggers. So I think having somebody there who can actually say, Donna, this is happening. You can't quite see it, but the other things you can see. So that's why I think that having someone help you recognize that stuff, because even now, like now that I've been doing all this reading, there are times where Buster will just stop in the middle of the walk and he will not budge. And all I know is that he's not happy.
Hmm.
And so I go, okay, you're not happy. I look around and I go, can't see anything. I can't hear anything for a human. And then I think, and because obviously he's blind and deaf, so it's either feel or smell that's got him to stop. And so now I just accept that I just have to pick him up, and he gets a free ride for a couple of 100 meters while Rosie and Kenji, thank God for a hands-free lead, I tell you. So,
Yep.
so because I look at them and I go, you two are okay. So this is obviously something that's quite specifically Buster, but I still haven't quite decoded. And I think sometimes I go, it'd be really good if there was somebody else kind of walking that would see the stuff that I'm obviously missing, because I've learnt the hard way that Buster, when he puts the skids on and will not move, that he just wants a free ride for a couple of 100 meters until whatever it is that's got him has passed. And sometimes I do wonder if he just wants a mid-walk cuddle.
And maybe, but that's what happens with having somebody who can recognize patterns in behavior, and it can be really subtle. It can be things like, I've had clients where I'm working with them, and we've been doing work with reactivity and passing other dogs at a distance, and I notice a really subtle shift where the dog will be walking on one side of the pawrent, and all of a sudden they'll switch around to the other, and it creates that extra meter, right? That extra meter of distance. It's super subtle. The dog doesn't make a big deal about it. I don't know. Floyd's chewing on a squeaky toy at the moment. I don't know if you can hear him.
I can hear it's cute.
Just like you're right. So the dog, very, 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 very,
Very subtle.
very
It's just,
subtly just went, I normally walk on this it was normally walked on the right side, right? Just all of a sudden went around to the left. And then as soon as the dog passed, came back around to the right. It was seamless. It was subtle. But even little things like that is enough for me to go, did you realize that he just switched sides? And the parent will go, oh my God, yes, I didn't realize that he did. And I said, I have said to them, do you know why? And they're like, no, I have no idea. And I said, because he may have been feeling a little uncomfortable being that close. And we're only talking about a meter, but a meter was enough to make him go, I'm actually, when somebody walks a little bit too close to you and you kind of take,
and you're like,
because you've got a personal space bubble.
yeah.
So dogs have that as well. And so for some dogs, they're just like, you know what, you're a little close in my personal space. I'm just going to go over here, and they actually will put their pawrent between themselves and the other dog to create a bit of a body block. So it can be really subtle, or things like, I don't think this is subtle, but if you're working with a dog who's got reactivity and all of a sudden they get really snappy with the treats, that can be a real indication that their arousal levels are building. And I'll sometimes say to clients, has she just gotten really snappy? And they're like, yeah. And that tells me, so there's no explosion of behavior.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden they got snappy. And so that
He did that at the weekend at Bark Park with somebody else who gave him a treat, and he's never done it before.
So sometimes that can be an indication of increased arousal levels. So it can be little things. It doesn't necessarily have to be this big explosion of behavior. It can be that all of a sudden they've changed pace. They've slowed down. They've stopped. They've looked in a particular direction. It can be that there can be really subtle signs. So when you are dealing with reactivity and anxiety, it is actually important to work with somebody that knows what they're doing. Because they will pick up on subtleties that you might miss. And it's like me working with an accountant, like I don't know how to do my taxes. I get somebody who knows what they're doing to do it for me. So it's important and they're qualified. So I make sure that they're qualified and they know what they're talking about. So it is important to, if you are going to seek out a professional, that they do have experience, they do have qualifications, they do use force-free methods, because the RSPCA has talked about force-free methods being the way to go. And the Australian Veterinary Association, I believe, has also, I think, has also mentioned that force-free methods are the way to go. So it's, seek out a force-free trainer for your pug, for your puggo.
Absolutely. Everything you've talked about, like tomorrow's walk is going to be slower than normal because I'm going to be extra observant of all three of them. Maybe I need to walk them one by themselves just so I can watch them individually.
You could do that,
It's
or you could
very
get someone to film you.
yes.
So if you get someone
Oh,
to
yes.
film you, and then you can watch it back and have a little bit of a look. But you also have to know what you're looking for. So that's the other
Yes.
thing. But
no, the moving from one side to the other, very interesting. I am going to watch that. Buster's now decided to wake up, so he must be getting hungry.
And also, don't forget that scent trails don't go in a straight line too. So it may not actually be anxiety. We're only specifically talking about reactivity and anxiety here. But dogs who don't have anxiety also often go from side to side because they're following scent trails. So that's the other. That's the other thing. Like it's not. It's not necessarily an
not one
anxious
answer
mover.
fixes all. Yes.
No, never is with behaviour, ever. Never, ever.
So if we were to talk about, quickly go over what behaviour escalation looks like. So sort of people can at least be aware and then go, well, I think I need to do something about this.
Yeah. So behaviour escalation, hey, handsome. Behaviour escalation is essentially where the behaviour just intensifies. So if we might see a behaviour, start with a bit of a bit of an oof, or a bit of a whine, or a bit of a whinge, or a bit of some kind of vocalization, and then it starts to become a bark, and then it starts to become a lunge, and then it starts to become, this explosion. So behaviour escalation is just where the behaviour is starting to get worse. And all that it means is that arousal levels are building. And by arousal, we are talking anxiety, frustration, fear, aggression, anger, and sexual arousal comes under that umbrella of arousal as well. If the dogs are desexed, that comes off the table.
That doesn't really factor in, yes.
No. So we're just talking about arousal levels are building. They might be becoming more anxious, or more frustrated, or more frightened, or more excited as another dog's approaching, or as a favorite person is approaching. Or so when we're talking about escalation, we're just talking about behavior intensifying, bigger explosions, bigger demonstrations of behavior. And we can see escalations of behavior sometimes when, like, I did have a client whose dog's behavior escalated after they used a shock collar on them. So sometimes we can see, escalation of behavior from the use of punishment, and extreme punishment, like a shock collar. We can see escalation in behavior. So, but essentially, it's just about the behavior getting worse rather than better.
And kind of understanding that if it's one woof, it might not be anything, but if it continues, then you need to look around.
Yeah, like I'm about to get an escalation of behaviour down here because it's getting close to dinner time, and somebody's telling me you should see his face right now. Hi. I'm getting little oofs. They're very, very gentle, and a bit of a scratch. It's going to intensify in a sec.
Yes, I have to admit, Buster is quite similar. This is hence the reason he's gotten off the bed and walked away from the hot water bottle, and I've had to put him on my lap because I know that he will start his 5-minute woof. So it's like a timer. We just get a woof, and then 5 minutes later, it's like, I still haven't had my needs met, so I'm going to woof again.
And look, we're very good as humans at reinforcing that behavior because we then get up and go and feed them. So, we're incredibly well trained. But
yes, we are.
Our beautiful boy Harvey, who we lost in October, I swear he had a watch, a pug watch. I'm sure of it because he used to come and stare at you at 6:01 and go, I believe you've forgotten something that should have happened a minute ago. And every time he would stare at us and we'd look, and without a doubt, it would be 1 or 2 minutes past 6, and 6 o'clock was dinner time. So they had us, very well trained.
Very well, yes.
Training goes both ways in our house. It goes both ways.
Yes. Yes. Rosie just sits in front of the fridge. It's and then she stamps her paw, just very subtly. But because we've got floorboards, it's enough for us to hear her little claws sort of tapping against the And it's like, what is going on in this house right now?
I think that's the beauty of pugs, though. They're so expressive. They're so
Oh,
incredibly
yes.
expressive. They're actually quite easy to read. And
Thank
I mean,
God.
the fact that they were bred for companion, and you know that breeds dogs that were bred for companionship have very human-like features, right? So the high foreheads, the flat noses, the big forward-facing eyes, they're very human-like in their features.
Mhm.
So they have a tendency, I believe, to be quite human-like in some of their
Oh,
expressions.
yes.
But then, dogs, I don't know. Like he's Floyd is looking at me like just he's so insanely
Oh,
cute.
oh,
Can
yes, that he absolutely is. But I'm gonna let you go so that Floyd can be appropriately satiated. I actually
oh,
think we had this conversation at the end of episode 6, actually, where Floyd was getting a little bit hungry.
I don't know,
Maybe it was
possibly.
Buster. One
I think
one of
I
them
don't
was.
know, I don't remember. It was just a pug that got hungry. That's just a day in why, really, isn't it?
I know, and yes, absolutely. It's like, it's G&T hour, mum.
That's
Like,
right, exactly, exactly. It's
but, before I let you go, I probably should, so if somebody has decided that maybe they actually need to talk to somebody,
Mhm.
how do they find you? Everything will be in the show notes, but quickly give us a rundown as to how people can find you.
Okay, so they can go onto my website, which is
Mm.
www.thecanineperspective.com.au. I'm also all over social, so I'm on Facebook and Insta and TikTok. I don't love TikTok, but I'm there. There's video of pugs in prams on TikTok. But yeah, so website's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Mm.
My book is for sale on my website. It's also available on Amazon. So the paperback and Kindle version, and the audiobook is coming out in a couple of months' time, which is exciting to me. So, and
Would
I
you be
keep
able to
getting
listen to it while you're walking your pug?
well, you could. You absolutely could. People have
You could
said to me,
skip.
"So are you gonna be reading it?" And I'm like, "Yes, I get me reading the book."
It'd be
But
awesome.
yeah, so that's coming out in a couple of months' time, which is super exciting.
Well, you could be walking your anxious pug while listening to the chapter about anxiety, and you just have to keep rewinding the bits where it talks about all the different triggers
Yeah, well,
until you
that's a thing. You could absolutely do that, for sure, for sure. There's also a really great website as well if you're looking for a force-free trainer. So I believe it's PP www oh my goodness,
PPGA? Yes.
www.ppga.com.au. That's a fabulous website that lists all the force-free trainers in Australia. But again, if you I do Zoom consults, so I can do consulting with people all over the world. If you prefer to have somebody in person, you can always contact me and I can always source someone for you. So that's another option too.
Oh. Thank you for coming back on again, Sarah. I really appreciate it. Kenji's probably gonna hate me as I watch him very closely after everything that I've learned. Andrew's gonna think I'm neurotic, that's for sure, but all for a good cause.
My absolute pleasure. Anytime. I love coming on this podcast. Anytime you want me to come and have a chat, I would love to.
That's awesome, and well, we may have to get just for Floyd and
Oh,
Doug,
yes.
to be honest.
Yes.
We may
Yes.
need to
Well,
do a Floyd and Doug episode.
we can always do a Floyd and Doug episode. Floyd and Doug are all over my socials. So if anybody wants to see Floyd, he's all over my socials. But yes, we absolutely can just do the Adventures of Doug and Floyd episode. That would be a riot, I reckon. We'd spend the whole time
Oh,
laughing.
yes.
Hilarious.
That's fine. We'll talk to I've been given my 10-minute warning.
Oh, okay.
So we'll see you soon. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Donna.
Bye. Every time Sarah comes on the show, Rosie, Kenji, and Buster end up getting an improved pug life because I always learn something new that I can put into practice straight away. Hopefully, this episode has helped you better understand what anxiety and reactivity really mean for your pug, and that behind every outburst or retreat is a pup who's just trying to feel safe in their world. Anxiety doesn't mean your pug is bad or they're broken. It means they need support, safety, and someone who's willing to listen to what their behavior is really saying. Now, if today's episode sparks some light bulb moments, or you know a fellow parent who might need to hear this, then please share it. And if you have any further questions for Sarah, or just want to share any aha moments from the episode, pop over to our Facebook group, the Pug Life Show Podcast, and tell us all about it. Plus, if you haven't already, please follow the podcast so you don't miss out on the next episode. And while you're at it, leave us a review. It only takes a couple of seconds to give us a 5-star review, and it goes a long way to helping other pug parents find us. Rosie, Kenji, Buster, and I hope that you will join us again soon. But until then, have a pawsome week, and humans, be generous with the snackies.